The aircraft was called Flying Tank. Most of the men who flew it did not live long enough to earn the nickname. In some regiments, a new pilot's life expectancy could be measured not in years, not in months, but in missions. 10, sometimes fewer. Crews joked about it the way soldiers joke about everything that frightens them, by pretending it was mathematics. If the average survival was 8 sorties, then on the 9th you were already a ghost, just waiting to be informed. The airplane itself was not fragile. It was one of the most heavily armored aircraft of the war. It could absorb rifle fire, shrug off shrapnel, and return home with holes large enough to see daylight through. The machine was built to survive. The men inside it were not. The Il-2 Shturmovik was born from a theory that war on the Eastern Front would be decided close to the ground. Soviet planners did not imagine a clean, distant air war. They envisioned a battlefield of mud, broken forests, shattered roads, and armored columns pushing through smoke. Air power, in this view, was not for duels in the sky. It was a hammer to strike tanks, guns, and infantry directly, low, slow, and deliberate. The Il-2 embodied that doctrine. Its engine, fuel lines, and cockpit were wrapped in a steel shell that formed part of the aircraft's structure. Armor was not bolted on as an afterthought. It was the skeleton. Designers assumed the aircraft would be hit. They planned for it. Weight was sacrificed for protection. Speed was traded for survivability. Agility was secondary to endurance under fire. On paper, this was logical. German divisions relied on movement. Supply trucks, artillery tows, armored spearheads. Break the vehicles, and the advance slowed. Destroy bridges, rail yards, and columns, and the front line stiffened. The Il-2 would fly below the cloud deck, find targets visually, and smash them with rockets, cannons, and small bombs. It was not elegant warfare. It was industrial, direct, and brutal. Geography reinforced the plan. The Eastern Front stretched across open steppe, river valleys, and vast agricultural plains. There were few natural barriers. Armies maneuvered over distances that dwarfed Western Europe. This scale made close air support essential. Ground forces could not wait for distant bombers or perfect coordination. They needed aircraft that could appear quickly, identify threats, and attack within minutes. But doctrine is drawn with lines on maps. Reality lives in air that smells of fuel and wet soil. To hit a tank or gun with 1940s weapons, a pilot had to descend into a narrow corridor of altitude and speed. Too high and rockets scattered. Too fast, and the target passed in a blur. Too slow, and gravity and enemy fire had time to do their work. The Il-2 operated inside this corridor, where every rifle, every machine gun, every light anti-aircraft cannon could reach. German forces adapted quickly. They learned that the armored aircraft overhead was not invulnerable, only stubborn. Rifle bullets might glance off the fuselage, but the radiator under the engine, the oil cooler, and the wing roots were vulnerable. More importantly, the aircraft had to fly straight during its attack run. Rockets demanded alignment. Cannons demanded stability. Predictability is a gift to a gunner. So the battlefield became a layered defense. Infantry carried machine guns with higher elevation. Trucks mounted quadruple 20mm cannons. Field units pulled anti-aircraft guns forward, closer than doctrine preferred, because the threat was not high-altitude bombers, but something coming in at treetop level. The sky, near the ground, hardened. Training lagged behind this evolution. The Soviet Union had lost thousands of experienced airmen in the first years of the war. Replacement pilots often had minimal flight hours. They learned procedures, not survival instincts. On training fields, targets did not shoot back. Instructors emphasized formation discipline, attack profiles, and navigation. Less time was available for evasive maneuvering under fire, for reading the ground, for knowing when not to press an attack. The aircraft itself added complications. Early Il-2 variants carried only a pilot. There was no rear gunner. From behind, the machine was nearly blind. German fighters noticed. A single Messerschmitt approaching from the rear quarter could sit in the blind spot and fire into the tail, fuel tanks, or cooling system. Soviet formations tried to compensate with tight group flying, overlapping fields of fire, but coordination at low altitude under fire with inexperienced crews was fragile. A pilot once described the cockpit as a metal box with a view of your own funeral. He meant the armor, the narrow canopy, the way sound changed when bullets struck. Impacts were not sharp cracks, but heavy thuds, like someone hitting a door with a hammer. The airframe vibrated differently under fire. Instruments shook. The smell of hot oil could enter the cockpit without warning. On approach to a target, the world narrowed. The horizon tilted as the aircraft descended. Fields resolved into trenches, roads into lines of vehicles. Tracers rose slowly at first, almost lazily, like fireflies drifting upward. Then they multiplied. White, red, and green threads stitched the air ahead. The pilot had to ignore them. Pulling up early meant missing the target. Missing meant another pass. Another pass meant more time in the corridor. German gunners experienced the same compression of time. A truck driver one day, he might find himself behind a 20mm gun the next, ordered to protect a column. The sky would be quiet. Then a distant hum would grow into a low, grinding roar. The Il-2's engine had a tone distinct from fighters, deeper, heavier. Gunners were taught to wait until the aircraft committed to its run. Too early, and the pilot could jink away. Too late, and the rockets were already gone. He would track the shape growing larger, the armored nose, the straight wings. The aircraft did not dodge like a fighter. It came on, steady. That steadiness was its strength against ground targets, and its weakness against prepared fire. The gunner felt his own fear, not of the pilot whom he could not see, but of the weapons coming toward him. Rockets did not argue, cannons did not hesitate. The duel was brief, mechanical. Inside the Il-2, the attack run demanded stillness of hands and mind. The pilot aligned the pipper, judged distance by experience more than instruments. The aircraft shuddered as rockets left the rails. The nose dipped slightly as weight changed. Then the pilot pulled, hard, feeling the straps bite into his shoulders. The aircraft climbed through its own smoke, engine straining. Sometimes it climbed, sometimes it did not. Armor could stop fragments, but it could not prevent systems from failing. A single hit to the cooling system might not destroy the aircraft immediately. The pilot would see the temperature needle rising, slowly, inevitably. Oil pressure dropping. The engine sound changing from a solid roar to a strained, uneven growl. He had minutes, perhaps less, to reach friendly lines. The aircraft that had been designed to absorb punishment became a clock. The addition of rear gunners in later variants changed the balance, but introduced new burdens. A second man meant more weight, more coordination, another life inside the metal shell. Gunners were often young, with little training beyond basic weapon handling. Their position was exposed, partially shielded, but open to wind and fragments. They fought the sky behind, scanning for fighters, firing at shapes that appeared and vanished in seconds. One gunner wrote that his world was wind and noise and looking back at death. He could not see the target ahead. He could not influence the attack. His task was to guard against what the pilot could not see. When fighters came, they came fast. A burst from a cannon could tear through the rear compartment. The gunner's survival depended on the pilot's maneuvering and the discipline of the formation. German fighter pilots learned that attacking Il-2 formations was hazardous, but necessary. The aircraft below were tearing up supply lines, artillery positions, and assembly areas. Letting them work undisturbed had consequences on the ground. But diving into a tight formation of armored attackers meant flying through defensive fire, risking collision with the earth, and committing to a fight at low altitude where energy was limited. Every system imposed its own costs. Weather compounded everything. The Eastern Front offered long periods of low cloud, haze, and smoke from constant fires. Il-2 crews often flew in marginal visibility, navigating by rivers, rail lines, and intuition. Landing fields near the front were rough, muddy, and crowded. Aircraft returned damaged, hydraulics failing, controls stiff. Landings that should have been routine became final tests. A blown tire, a collapsed gear, and the armored cockpit became a trap. Effectiveness was not in doubt. The Il-2 inflicted real damage. German reports complained of disrupted movements, destroyed vehicles, and constant harassment. Columns moved at night to avoid daylight attacks. Camouflage improved. Anti-aircraft defenses thickened. The aircraft achieved what it was designed to do. It forced the enemy to adapt, to divert resources, to move more slowly and cautiously. But every adaptation by one side sharpened the danger for the other. As anti-aircraft guns multiplied, Il-2 losses rose. As Soviet tactics demanded repeated sorties to maintain pressure, fatigue eroded judgment. As replacements arrived with fewer hours in the air, the gap between doctrine and lived experience widened. The system required relentless output. The men inside it paid the difference. There were no clean victories in this exchange. A pilot who destroyed a fuel truck might not return. A gunner who drove off an attacker might be overrun days later by the ground forces that aircraft had failed to stop. Success and loss were entangled, measured in columns delayed and aircraft missing from the evening count. After missions, survivors spoke quietly. They described sounds more than sights: the hammering on armor, the change in engine note, the sudden silence when a wingman did not answer the radio. They remembered the weight of the helmet, the stiffness in their hands from gripping the controls, the taste of exhaust that seemed to coat the throat. They rarely spoke of targets. They spoke of distance, how far it had been to friendly lines when the engine began to fail. The war moved on. Fronts shifted west. Production increased. Tactics improved incrementally. But the fundamental geometry did not change. To be effective, the Il-2 had to descend into the envelope of nearly every weapon on the ground. Armor could bend the odds, not erase them. In the quiet after a sortie, mechanics patched holes, replaced panels, cleaned oil from undersides. They worked on machines that looked as though they had been dragged through storms of metal. They prepared them to fly again. Each repaired aircraft meant another crew would climb into the steel shell and point its nose toward the same corridor of fire. Long after the noise passed, what remained for many survivors was not pride or triumph, but a narrowing of memory. Certain days stood out with painful clarity, others vanished. They remembered faces from morning briefings that were absent by evening. They remembered counting aircraft on the horizon during return and counting again, hoping numbers would change. The Il-2 was a solution to a military problem, engineered with care and conviction. It did what it was asked to do. It struck hard, endured punishment, and shaped the battlefield below. Its crews were part of that solution, necessary, replaceable, and exposed to a level of risk that no armor could fully shield. In the end, the aircraft outlived many of the men who flew it. Museums display its thick plates of steel, its heavy wings, its weapons. The metal looks permanent, almost reassuring. It suggests strength, protection, intention fulfilled. What it does not show is the space inside, where a pilot watched gauges climb and fall, where a gunner stared into a sky that might suddenly ignite. It does not show the arithmetic whispered between missions or the quiet after roll call when numbers did not match. The machine was built to survive the war. The crew survived it in smaller numbers, carrying forward the weight of flights made through air that had become, for them, a place of work, fear, and memory.